2 a.m. Welcome back to the 2 a.m. Book Review Club, where we stay up late talking about books or talk about books that made us stay up late. In 2010, 20th Century Fox released Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, a Chris Columbus directed adaptation of the hit 2005 middle grade novel of the same name. This movie and its 2013 sequel, Sea of Monsters, were described by author Rick Riordan in June of 2020 as my life's work going through a meat grinder. This wasn't the first time Rick Riordan had expressed his disappointment with the movies. In November of 2018, he wrote an extensive blog post on his website entitled Memories from My TV/Movie Experience, where he talked about the possibility of a reboot. Should a reboot happen someday, in some fashion, I would hope, like you, that it would be a great adaptation that is faithful to the books and fun to watch. The fact that Disney has now acquired the rights from Fox may be hopeful news, but it doesn't change my contractual powers, which are zilch. Still, I've let it be known that I would be happy to consult and advise if they want me, and if the new project was undertaken by a completely different team than the one which made the movies. I think that would be important. Fresh eyes, fresh ideas, hopefully people who know and are passionate about the books. I have no desire to go through my first experience again and see the same results. If I felt like that was going to be the case, I would have to stay away from the project completely. In the future, if some project actually does get underway, I may not be able to comment on it for contractual reasons, but you can tell how I'm feeling about it by what I do or don't say. Am I talking about it, promoting it, sharing cool things? I am probably happy. Am I completely ignoring it and never mentioning it on social media? Yeah, that's probably not a good sign. For instance, check out my website, rickriordan.com. Do you see any indication that the Percy Jackson movies ever existed? No, you do not. Rick Riordan isn't alone in feeling this way about the Percy Jackson films. If anything, he's probably less vehement than his fanbase, who still remain bitter about the film adaptations, or should I call them maladaptations. But if nothing else, we did at least get some memorable reviews. The Daily Telegraph called The Lightning Thief a slab of market research in search of an actual movie, and the Herald Sun delivered the succinct and possibly even more devastating judgment, okay, but only just. Reviews for Sea of Monsters are even more scathing, with the Austin Chronicle calling it a ham-fisted, teen-centric blend of Harry Potter and the infinitely more spellbinding Jason and the Argonauts comes within a Cyclops eyelash of being so bad it's almost, but not quite, good. And the Orange County Register calls it whiny, listless, and repetitive. Ouch. But in January 2022, Disney Plus greenlit a TV series, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Note the change from an ampersand to the word and. Co-written and executive produced by the author himself. In large part thanks to this promise of greater creative control from the author, the TV show has generated a lot of hype, not least from Rick Riordan himself. In his December 13th blog post entitled, "Welcome to New York, the gods have been waiting for you," Taylor Swift reference alert, he enthuses over attending the red carpet premiere in New York City. He provides plenty of photos, calls the series an incredible experience, and participates in a Q&A from equally excited fans. 18 years after the release of that original book, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, the author and his fans seem confident at last that they're getting the adaptation they've been waiting for. And by the time this video is out, the series will have premiered, so feel free to leave your own opinions of the TV show down in the comments. But like I said, it has been 18 years. Plenty of book series have come and gone since 2005, and yet this series, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, still carries enough cultural capital for Disney Plus to greenlight a series adaptation with plenty of budget-eating, CGI-heavy aesthetics and action sequences. So why does Percy Jackson remain such a relevant franchise? Why do we still care so much about seeing this book series not just adapted, but adapted well? Today, I'm here to revisit this series, the original 5 Percy Jackson books, characters, themes, and of course, all of the wacky craziness, the epic awesomeness that we remember these books for. But in order to understand how this series came to be, we need to rewind back to the middle grade / YA bookscape of 2005, which was then dominated by the search for the next Harry Potter. "2005 saw the release of the 6th Harry Potter novel, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which was both a critical and a commercial success. According to Wikipedia, before publication, 1.4 million pre-orders were placed for Half-Blood Prince on Amazon.com, breaking the record held by the previous novel, Order of the Phoenix, with 1.3 million. The initial print run for Half-Blood Prince was a record-breaking 10.8 million. But while the Harry Potter movies would continue to be made until 2011, the release of the final Harry Potter novel, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was only 2 years away. And maybe more crucially, the Harry Potter series had changed. Whereas the original book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was a light-hearted, magical boarding school adventure, by the time of Half-Blood Prince's release, even reviewers were commenting on the series' change in tone. Enormous and seemingly unstoppable as the Harry Potter juggernaut was, by 2005, the series had grown up, and its fans had too. Middle grade readers were ready for a new phenomenon. They were ready for the next totally ordinary, but secretly super cool, protagonist to sweep them away on an amazing adventure, to forever change their view of the world the way Harry Potter had done for the previous generation. By 2005, the search was definitively on for the next Harry Potter. Luckily, middle grade readers wouldn't have to wait too long because 2005 was also the year that saw the launch of the series that would win the title of the next Harry Potter, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Everything is a product of its time, and books possibly more so than anything else. In 2005, I don't think it was possible to write a middle grade fantasy book without being in some way inspired or influenced by Harry Potter's success. And it's not difficult to find similarities between the two series. Most obviously, there's the title format and also the fact that both series star black-haired, green-eyed, similarly aged boys who discover one day that they're not like the other muggles or mortals and are sent to special institutions to develop their magical abilities. Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts, a boarding school. Percy Jackson goes to Camp Half-Blood, a summer camp. Over the course of their respective series, both boys become formidable fighters who help save the world from reincarnated villains who hold personal grudges against them. And both series develop alternate realities that exist alongside our own, just out of reach, designed to make readers daydream and write thousands of words of fanfiction about. But the similarities are ultimately superficial. Where the Harry Potter series places its emphasis on prestige and privilege, the Percy Jackson series places its emphasis on perseverance and belonging. Being a witch or a wizard is something special, something powerful, something to covet and aspire to. Finding out you're a demigod, a half-blood, the child of a human and a Greek god is a completely different story. At best, it's a never-ending challenge to prove your own worth, validate your existence, carve out your place in both the mortal and immortal worlds. And at worst, it pretty much guarantees an early and deeply unpleasant demise. This difference is emphasized from the very beginning of the series, starting with the opening pages of Book 1, The Lightning Thief. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too, and they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. Instead of whimsical, shape-shifting cats or overly specific gadgets used only to turn off streetlights, the opening paragraphs of The Lightning Thief strike the distinctive tone we'll become so familiar with over the course of 5 books. Our narrator and protagonist is Percy Jackson, 12 years old at the beginning of the series and just barely 16 at the end of the 5th and final book. Like author Rick Riordan's own son, Percy has ADHD and dyslexia, which, in the universe of the books, are actually a sign that you're a demigod. Here's Percy shortly after arriving at Camp Half-Blood, talking to one of the more knowledgeable campers. Diagnosed with dyslexia. Probably ADHD too. I tried to swallow my embarrassment. What does that have to do with anything? Taken together, it's almost a sure sign. The letters float off the page when you read, right? That's because your mind is hardwired to read ancient Greek. And the ADHD, you're impulsive, can't sit still in the classroom. That's your battlefield reflexes. In a real fight, they'd keep you alive. As for the attention problems, that's because you see too much, Percy, not too little. Your senses are better than a regular mortal's. Of course the teachers want you medicated. Most of them are monsters. They don't want you seeing them for what they are. Percy's narrative voice in this series is almost invariably sarcastic and irreverent, reflective of the jaded teenage New Yorker that he is. Every other sentence is a punchline. Every other chapter is a high-stakes action sequence or a heart-pumping battle against a mythological monster. Probably my most common reaction while reading this series was, well, that just happened. And you can see what I mean just by looking at the chapter titles. In Book 1 alone, we have classics like Chapter 1, I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Chapter 3, Grover unexpectedly loses his pants. And my personal favorite, Chapter 15, A God buys us cheeseburgers. So let's take a quick tour of the events of this series, and I'll include some rest stops along the way to showcase my favorite, well, that just happened moments. So all aboard the Percy Jackson train. First stop, Camp Half-Blood. Book 1, The Lightning Thief. 12-year-old Percy Jackson arrives home from boarding school for the summer. Percy's only friend from school, Grover, shows up because he's been stalking Percy and says that Percy is in danger. Percy, his mom, and Grover, who turns out to be a satyr, aka a humanoid goat boy, race off into the night to a special summer camp. But just as they arrive, a minotaur shows up and kills Percy's mother. Percy, in turn, kills the minotaur and is admitted to the camp, which turns out to be Camp Half-Blood. There, he's surprised to find his Latin teacher from school, who is actually a centaur named Chiron. Chiron explains that this is Camp Half-Blood, a summer camp for demigods, and Chiron's job is to train the campers to fight mythological monsters like the Minotaur. Campers live in the cabin of their divine parents, unless they're of unknown or minor god parentage, in which case they are sent to the extremely overcrowded Hermes cabin, which is headed by a teenager named Luke. Given that Percy's parentage is unknown, this is where he's sent. However, Percy is soon revealed as the son of Poseidon, which is a big deal because Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, the big three gods, aren't supposed to be having kids. After Percy is attacked by a hellhound, Chiron sends Percy, Grover, and Annabeth, another camper, on a quest to find Zeus's master lightning bolt, which has gone missing. Given the hellhound, they suspect that Hades might be the thief, and they decide to make their way to the underworld, aka Los Angeles. Along the way, they run into Ares, do a side quest for him that involves an abandoned water park, and receive a backpack of supplies in return. Once in the underworld, Hades accuses Percy of stealing both the lightning bolt and also his helm of darkness, which has also gone missing. Percy discovers that he is carrying the lightning bolt in the backpack that Ares gave him, and our trio of heroes barely manage to escape the underworld alive. Percy battles Ares and returns the helm of darkness to Hades, thereby rescuing his mother from the dead. He also returns the lightning bolt to Zeus, then goes back to summer camp. On the last day of camp, Percy is almost killed by the real thief, who turns out to be Luke. Luke then disappears to join Kronos, the Titan, who was defeated by the gods and trapped in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. Kronos wants revenge on Mount Olympus, and Luke has decided to help him. Chiron convinces Percy not to go after Luke until he's better trained, and Percy goes home for the school year. The end. My favorite, well, that just happened, moment in book 1 is Percy's battle with the Minotaur, which in classic Percy Jackson style, he does both weaponless and also with no regard for the laws of physics. I put my back to the pine tree and waved my red jacket in front of the bull man, thinking I'd jump out of the way at the last moment. But it didn't happen like that. The bull man charged too fast, his arms out to grab me whichever way I tried to dodge. Time slowed down. My legs tensed. I couldn't jump sideways, so I leaped straight up, kicking from the creature's head, using it as a springboard, turning in midair and landing on his neck. So, okay, he's landed on the Minotaur's neck. He is now riding the creature around, and I know what you're thinking, but how does he actually kill it? Here's how. I got both hands around one horn, and I pulled backward with all my might. The monster tensed, gave a surprised grunt, then snap! The bullman screamed and flung me through the air. I landed flat on my back in the grass, my head smacked against a rock. When I sat up, my vision was blurry, but I had a horn in my hand, a ragged bone weapon the size of a knife. The monster charged. Without thinking, I rolled to one side and came up kneeling. As the monster barreled past, I drove the broken horn straight into his side, right up under his furry rib cage. The bowman roared in agony. He flailed, clawing at his chest, then began to disintegrate. Not like my mother in a flash of golden light, but like crumbling sand, blown away in chunks by the wind, the same way Mrs. Dobbs had burst apart. The monster was gone. You may have noticed that Percy hits his head so hard in this scene that he feels dizzy, but he just ignores it and carries on with the battle. This is a recurring motif throughout the series. The kids keep hitting their heads pretty much every battle scene, sometimes so hard that they pass out. But it's always fine because brain damage is apparently not a thing in the Percy Jackson universe. Book 2, The Sea of Monsters. Grover is kidnapped by a Cyclops, and Camp Half-Blood is in danger because the divine pine tree protecting its borders is sick. Camp Half-Blood needs the Golden Fleece, which is guarded by the Cyclops who kidnapped Grover. So, 2 goals, 1 mission. Percy, his newly discovered Cyclops half-brother Tyson, Annabeth, and Clarice, another camper who is the daughter of Ares, set off to retrieve the fleece and save both Camp Half-Blood and Grover. Along the way, they run into Luke, who has gathered an army of monsters and angry half-bloods on a zombie cruise ship and is busy rescuing Kronos from Tartarus. They escape Luke and finally rescue both Grover and the Golden Fleece, which doesn't just cure the pine tree, but also transforms it back into the girl it used to be. So, the pine tree's origin story is that Thalia, daughter of Zeus, was making her way to Camp Half-Blood when she was killed by a monster on the edges of the camp and was then turned into a pine tree by Zeus. So now we have 2 children of the big 3, Thalia and Percy, running around. My favorite, well, that just happened moment in book 2 is the battle with the Hydra, the many-headed monster you might recognize from the myth of Hercules. We learned that in the Percy Jackson universe, as we've all long suspected, chain stores secretly have a more nefarious purpose. Oh, come on, Annabeth. Monster Donut doesn't mean monsters. It's a chain. We've got them in New York. A chain, she agreed. And don't you think it's strange that one appeared immediately after you told Tyson to get donuts? Right here in the middle of the woods? I thought about it. It did seem a little weird, but I mean, donut shops weren't real high on my list of sinister forces. It could be a nest, Annabeth explained. Tyson whimpered. I doubt he understood what Annabeth was saying any better than I did, but her tone was making him nervous. He'd plowed through a half a dozen donuts from his box and was getting powdered sugar all over his face. A nest for what? I asked. Haven't you ever wondered how franchise stores pop up so fast? She asked. One day there's nothing, and then the next day, boom! There's a new burger place, or a coffee shop, or whatever. First a single store, then 2, then 4. Exact replicas spreading across the country? No. Never thought about it. Percy, some of the chains multiply so fast because all their locations are magically linked to the life force of a monster. Some children of Hermes figured out how to do it back in the 1950s. They breed... She froze. What? I demanded. They breed what? No sudden moves, Annabeth said, like her life depended on it. Very slowly. Turn around. Then I heard it, a scraping noise like something large dragging its belly through the leaves. I turned and saw a rhino-sized thing moving through the shadows of the trees. It was hissing, its front half writhing in all different directions. I couldn't understand what I was seeing at first. Then I realized the thing had multiple necks, at least 7, each topped with a hissing reptilian head. Its skin was leathery, and under each neck, it wore a plastic bib that read, "I'm a monster donut kid." Yes, this is the Hydra, the legendary many-headed monster from the Labors of Hercules, which Annabeth, Percy, and Tyson will now have to battle. But honestly, the best part of the battle scene is this punchline. I sliced the Hydra's head clean off. It rolled away into the grass, leaving a flailing stump, which immediately stopped bleeding and began to swell like a balloon. In a matter of seconds, the wounded neck split into 2 necks, each of which grew a full-size head. Now, I was looking at an 8-headed Hydra. "Percy," Annabeth scolded, "you just opened another monster donut shop somewhere." Book 3, The Titan's Curse. Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Thalia break into a school to rescue 2 half-bloods, siblings Nico and Bianca. A monster attacks, kidnaps Annabeth, and takes her to Luke. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is also kidnapped. Percy, Grover, and Thalia set off to rescue Annabeth along with Artemis's hunters, who Bianca has decided to join. Along the way, Bianca dies, they get Annabeth back, battle with Luke, and eventually blow up his zombie ship, but fail to kill Luke. At the end of the book, Nico is revealed to be the son of Hades. In many ways, this is the most straightforward action-adventure story in the series and doesn't really have any, well, that just happened moments, at least for me. Book 4, The Battle of the Labyrinth. Okay, this has to be my favorite book. In this book, Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Tyson descend into the Labyrinth, a giant maze with dangers and monsters around every corner. Our heroes are searching for Daedalus, inventor of the maze, but they are competing against Luke and his allies, who are also in the labyrinth, trying to find a way into Camp Half-Blood so they can destroy it. Our heroes save Camp Half-Blood, but Kronos has come back by taking over Luke's body, and the battle to end all battles is just around the corner. Nico reappears at the end of the book, having forgiven Percy for Bianca's death, and he says that he has found a way for Percy to defeat Kronos. My favorite, well, that just happened, moment in book 4 is the battle with the Sphinx, aka the game show of death. Annabeth, Percy, and Tyson run into the Sphinx in the labyrinth, but this Sphinx looks a bit different from the one in Greek mythology. Then I saw the monster. She stood on a glittery dais on the opposite side of the room. She had the body of a huge lion and the head of a woman. She would have been pretty, but her hair was tied back in a tight bun, and she wore too much makeup, so she kind of reminded me of my 3rd grade choir teacher. She had a blue ribbon badge pinned to her chest that took me a moment to read. This monster has been rated exemplary. This modern iteration of the Sphinx also acts a bit different. "Welcome, lucky contestants," she announced. "Get ready to play. Answer that riddle." Canned applause blasted from the ceiling as if there were invisible loudspeakers. Spotlights swept across the room and reflected off the dais, throwing disco glitter over the skeletons on the floor. "Fabulous prizes," the Sphinx said. "Pass the test and you get to advance. Fail, and I get to eat you. Who will be our contestant?" Annabeth, being the daughter of Athena, obviously steps up to play the game, and the Sphinx starts giving out riddles, plural. "Welcome, Annabeth Chase!" the monster cried, though Annabeth hadn't said her name. Are you ready for your test? Yes, she said. Ask your riddle. 20 riddles, actually, the Sphinx said gleefully. What? But back in the old days, we've raised our standards. To pass, you must show proficiency in all 20. Isn't that great? Applause switched on and off like somebody turning a faucet. And you'll never guess where this is going because the battle with the Sphinx turns into a commentary on standardized testing. The Sphinx smiled so wide her fangs showed. Please be sure to mark your answer clearly on your test sheet with a number 2 pencil. What? Annabeth looked mystified. Then a test booklet appeared on the podium in front of her, along with a sharpened pencil. Make sure you bubble each answer clearly and stay inside the circle, the Sphinx said. If you have to erase, erase completely, or the machine will not be able to read your answers. The Sphinx asks her the square root of 16, as well as the capital of Bulgaria, and Annabeth, being Annabeth, gets upset. These aren't riddles, Annabeth said. What do you mean? The Sphinx snapped. Of course they are. This test material is specially designed. It's just a bunch of dumb, random facts, Annabeth insisted. Riddles are supposed to make you think. Think? The Sphinx frowned. How am I supposed to test whether you can think? That's ridiculous. Annabeth calls the test stupid, and the Sphinx attacks, leading to a battle that results in the destruction of her grading machine. My grading machine, she cried. I can't be exemplary without my test scores. They win the battle, of course, and the trio runs off, listening to the roar of the Sphinx behind us as she complained about all the tests she would have to grade by hand. Book 5, The Last Olympian. This is the book with the big battle, complete with flying pigs, statues coming to life, and all of the people in New York City falling asleep. Our heroes do defeat Kronos, obviously, partially thanks to Nico's advice, but this is the saddest book in the series with a lot of emotional deaths and other tragedies that I'll be getting more into later. For obvious reasons, this book really doesn't have any, well, that just happened moments, unless you count the flying pig. So, those are the events of the Percy Jackson series, but of course, the heart of any series isn't what happens, but who it happens to. And the reason we care so much about what happens in this series is because we care about Percy Jackson. So let's talk about him. Percy Jackson, smart-ass New Yorker, and also son of the sea god. Like so many fantasy series, the Percy Jackson series revolves around a prophecy known simply as the Great Prophecy. This prophecy is revealed to us bit by bit over the course of the books, but it's not revealed in full until the 5th book. A half-blood of the eldest gods shall reach 16 against all odds, and see the world in endless sleep. The hero's soul cursed blade shall reap. A single choice shall end his days. Olympus to preserve or raise. Basically, this prophecy says that there will be a child of one of the big 3 gods, Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades, who on their 16th birthday will make a choice that will either save Olympus and the age of the gods, or destroy it. Oh, and also it's implied that this choice will kill the hero, so there's that. The series teases a couple of alternative possibilities when it comes to which child of the big 3 the prophecy is talking about. It could be Zeus's daughter Thalia or Hades' son Nico, but we all know it's going to end up being Percy, and that knowledge hangs over him the entire series. Percy Jackson is undeniably the hero of his own series, a dynamic force that is constantly driving the story forward with his choices. In a world ruled by gods and monsters, Percy is most often driven by his own motivations rather than the directives of forces more powerful than him. And even when he's explicitly told what to do, obedience doesn't come easily to him. But if you remember your Greek mythology and also your Greek tragedies, heroes who pay more attention to their own motivations rather than the directives of the gods have a habit of meeting nasty ends. Almost every Greek tragedy boils down to a simple through line. It doesn't pay to prioritize your own desires above whatever it is that the gods want from you. Because once you start making a habit of defying the gods, it becomes a bit of an ego boost. It makes you think that maybe you don't need the gods. Maybe you can just do whatever you want. Unsurprisingly, the gods aren't really fond of this kind of thinking. Heroes are apt to fall into the same time-worn trap, hubris, aka the kind of pride that leads you to think that you know better than the gods. Percy does often disobey the gods, but it's only ever in service to the greater purpose of protecting Camp Half-Blood or Mount Olympus. His fatal flaw isn't hubris, but rather something much more in line with most protagonists in children's media. He cares too much about his friends. Here's a conversation he has with Athena, Annabeth's mother, towards the end of Book 3. Kronos knows your flaw, even if you do not. He knows how to study his enemies. Think, Percy. How has he manipulated you? First, your mother was taken from you. Then, your best friend Grover. Now my daughter, Annabeth. She paused, disapproving. In each case, your loved ones have been used to lure you into Kronos' traps. Your fatal flaw is personal loyalty, Percy. You do not know when it is time to cut your losses. To save a friend, you would sacrifice the world. In a hero of the prophecy, that is very, very dangerous. I balled my fists. That's not a flaw, just because I want to help my friends. The most dangerous flaws are those which are good in moderation, she said. Evil is easy to fight. Lack of wisdom, that is very hard indeed. Flaw or not, we can see this tendency from the very beginning of the series. In that very first battle he fights with the Minotaur just outside of Camp Half-Blood. So, to recap, Percy's mother, and Grover have just arrived at Half-Blood Hill, the hill that the camp is situated on, and the Minotaur shows up. Percy's mother insists that Percy get to camp and to safety. That's the property line, my mom said. Get over that hill and you'll see a big farmhouse down in the valley. Run and don't look back. Yell for help. Don't stop until you reach the door. Mom, you're coming too. Her face was pale, her eyes as sad as when she looked at the ocean. No, I shouted. You are coming with me. Help me carry Grover. Food, Grover moaned a little louder. The man with the blanket on his head kept coming toward us, making his grunting, snorting noises. As he got closer, I realized he couldn't be holding a blanket over his head because his hands, huge, meaty hands, were swinging at his sides. There was no blanket, meaning the bulky, fuzzy mass that was too big to be his head was his head, and the points that looked like horns. He doesn't want us, my mother told me. He wants you. Besides, I can't cross the property line. But we don't have time, Percy. Go, please. Percy's mom is telling him that he needs to go and that she'll be okay. But Percy insists on getting her and Grover to safety as well. Now, it's possible that Percy's mother is lying, but in the Percy Jackson universe, it's pretty firmly established that monsters are specifically attracted to heroes, to demigods. Mortals are more often collateral damage than they are deliberate targets. And with a monster like the Minotaur, who isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, it's about as much as he can manage to focus on a single target. So it's probably, Percy's stubbornness that gets his mother killed. And it's entirely in character for Percy that what drives him to find Zeus's master lightning bolt in book 1 is the possibility of getting his mother back. The truth was, I didn't care about retrieving Zeus's lightning bolt, or saving the world, or even helping my father out of trouble. The more I thought about it, the more I resented Poseidon for never visiting me, never helping my mom, never even sending a lousy child support check. He'd only claimed me because he needed a job done. All I cared about was my mom. Hades had taken her unfairly, and Hades was going to give her back. Being a demigod isn't easy, not just because monsters are constantly out to get you, but also because you're trapped between two very different worlds. You're not really part of the regular human world because you're constantly doing quests for the gods, but you're also not really part of the immortal world because the gods are, well, gods, and they aren't particularly interested in playing happy family with their half-blood offspring. And yet the gods are dependent on those offspring, on demigods, to become heroes and carry on the fight to protect the mortal and in turn the mortal worlds. Here's a conversation between Chiron and Percy towards the end of book 2. He pulled an arrow from his quiver and turned the razor-sharp tip so it glinted in the firelight. Celestial bronze, Percy. An immortal weapon. What would happen if you shot this at a human? Nothing, I said. It would pass right through. That's right, he said. Humans don't exist on the same level as immortals. They can't even be hurt by our weapons. But you, Percy, you are part god, part human. You live in both worlds. You can be harmed by both, and you can affect both. That's what makes heroes so special. You carry the hopes of humanity into the realm of the eternal. Monsters never die. They are reborn from the chaos and barbarism that is always bubbling underneath civilization, the very stuff that makes Kronos stronger. They must be defeated again and again, kept at bay. Heroes embody that struggle. You fight the battles humanity must win every generation in order to stay human. Do you understand? Imagine feeling that kind of pressure every day, all the time to, quote-unquote, carry the hopes of humanity into the realm of the eternal. Imagine being the person who has to fight the battles humanity must win every generation in order to stay human. Now imagine that you're feeling that pressure, fighting those battles for a group of immortal beings who are rarely appreciative and generally hostile. One of those gods is your parent, and even they are mostly indifferent to your existence. Being a demigod means finding your place somewhere between these worlds. It means never quite belonging anywhere and having to be okay with that. That's a lot to deal with, and it's no surprise that some demigods deal better with this situation than others. You know that action movie cliche where the villain says to the hero, "We're not so different, you and I." Well, in the case of the Percy Jackson series, this is kinda true. The true villain of the series is obviously Kronos, But the more immediate villain is Luke, the son of Hermes who turned out to be a traitor at the end of book 1. Luke has many reasons for supporting Kronos, but fundamentally, his reasoning boils down to pain. Pain over Hermes' inability to rescue him from a terrible domestic situation. Pain over feeling like he didn't matter. Taking Kronos' side means Luke can't be ignored, can't be pushed aside or minimized. Luke becomes the center of attention, even if that attention is negative. And Kronos is offering Luke the chance to build a new world in which the other demigods aren't subjected to the same pain that he's experienced his entire life. When he felt abandoned by the gods, and particularly by his father, Luke became lost, self-centered, blinded to everything except his own suffering. Percy certainly isn't a stranger to feeling abandoned by his divine parent. After all, he spends much of the series working through his complicated feelings towards his father, the sea god Poseidon. He develops similarly ambivalent or even outright hostile relationships with the other gods. Zeus, Ares, and Hera would gladly see Percy dead, and for the most part, the other gods wouldn't really care either way. After everything that Percy has sacrificed, it really wouldn't be all that surprising if he did decide that, like Luke, he had had enough of these ungrateful and often ungracious gods. But that's not the choice Percy makes. And while we'll get more into the ethics of supporting the gods versus the titans later in the video, there's a very simple reason why Percy doesn't join Kronos, and it has very little to do with who's right and who's wrong, who deserves to run the world and who doesn't. Percy remains on the side of Mount Olympus and the gods because he doesn't really struggle to define who he is and where he belongs. As a child, he's intensely devoted to his mother, but struggles to make friends. When he finally arrives at Camp Half-Blood, it's not just a place that provides useful training for fighting monsters. It's also a place where he's understood and accepted, a place where he'll develop deep and lasting friendships. Percy doesn't need to define his place in either the mortal or immortal worlds because his sense of self is instead defined by the attachments that he forms to Chiron, to Grover, to Annabeth, to Tyson, to Camp Half-Blood itself. The most explicit example of this occurs in Book 5, in the lead up to the big battle to end all big battles, at least within the Percy Jackson universe. Percy decides that the only way to defeat Kronos is by taking Nico's advice, by making himself invincible. So, following the example of the hero Achilles, Percy takes a bath in the river Styx, which is located in the underworld and is also the river upon which the gods swear their most solemn oaths. This experience is, not pleasant, to say the least. Imagine jumping into a pit of boiling acid. Now, multiply that pain times 50. You still won't be close to understanding what it felt like to swim in the Styx. I planned to walk in, slow and courageous, like a real hero. As soon as the water touched my legs, my muscles turned to jelly and I fell face first into the current. I submerged completely. For the first time in my life, I couldn't breathe underwater. I finally understood the panic of drowning. Every nerve in my body burned. I was dissolving in the water. And what saves Percy is the memory of Annabeth. I could see Annabeth now, standing barefoot above me on the canoe lake pier. I'd fallen out of my canoe. That was it. She was reaching out her hand to haul me up, and she was trying not to laugh. She wore her orange camp t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was tucked up in her Yankees cap, which was strange because that should have made her invisible. "You are such an idiot sometimes," she smiled. "Come on, take my hand." Memories came flooding back to me, sharper and more colorful. I stopped dissolving. My name was Percy Jackson. I reached up and took Annabeth's hand. As is demonstrated in this scene, his friends and family are what tie Percy to the mortal realm. These connections are what anchor him to his sense of self, to his role as a demigod, a son of Poseidon, the defender of Mount Olympus. Percy isn't defending an ideology or a power structure or even his father. He defends the people he cares about, and he defends Camp Half-Blood, the safe space that they have carved out for themselves. Athena calls Percy's extreme sense of personal loyalty his fatal flaw, but this is also what saves Percy from the kind of ideological and philosophical confusion that seduces so many demigods over the course of the series. But Percy isn't the only one who values his friends. There's a conversation that Percy has with Luke about a quarter of the way through book 1, long before Percy discovers that Luke has gone over to Kronos' side, when Luke is still just an older camper who's being nice to the new kid. "I don't belong here," I said. "I don't even believe in gods." "Yeah," he said, "that's how we all get started. Once you start believing in them, it doesn't get any easier." The bitterness in his voice surprised me, because Luke seemed like a pretty easygoing guy. He looked like he could handle just about anything. "So your dad is Hermes?" I asked. He pulled a switchblade out of his back pocket, and for a second, I thought he was going to gut me, but he just scraped the mud off the sole of his sandal. "Yeah, Hermes. The wing-footed messenger guy. That's him. Messengers, medicine, travelers, merchants, thieves, anybody who uses the roads. That's why you're here, enjoying Cabin 11's hospitality. Hermes isn't picky about who he sponsors." I figured Luke didn't mean to call me a nobody. He just had a lot on his mind. "You ever meet your dad?" I asked. "Once." I waited, thinking that if he wanted to tell me, he'd tell me. Apparently, he didn't. I wondered if the story had anything to do with how he got his scar. Luke looked up and managed a smile. "Don't worry about it, Percy. The campers here, they're mostly good people. After all, we're extended family, right? We take care of each other." Two things jump out at me from this scene. One is, of course, the foreshadowing of the menace and danger that Luke represents. But the other thing is that last line of dialogue from Luke, where he talks about the other campers being family. Given that he almost destroys Camp Half-Blood multiple times throughout the series, this doesn't read as entirely sincere, but paradoxically, Luke is also not lying. Luke first arrived at Camp Half-Blood with two other demigods, a 7-year-old Annabeth and a teenage Thalia, daughter of Zeus. Thalia died on the boundaries of Camp Half-Blood, protecting the others from a monster, and her death impacted both Luke and Annabeth deeply. Over the course of their journey to Camp Half-Blood, Luke came to consider Annabeth and Thalia his family, and after his decision to join Kronos, Luke is confronted time and again by both Annabeth and Thalia over how they used to be a family, how personally painful his betrayal is to them. And during that final climactic battle on Mount Olympus in Book 5, the showdown between Luke and our core cast of heroes, the battle to end all battles, Percy's side is losing, and badly. Luke has given his body over to Kronos, and the Titan has almost completely been reincarnated. No matter how many monsters Percy has defeated, there's no way that he can defeat the most powerful Titan to ever exist. But the turning point of the battle comes when Kronos, in Luke's body, hurts Annabeth. Kronos pushed again, and this time Annabeth lost her balance. With his free hand, Kronos struck her face, and she slid backward. I summoned all my will. I managed to rise, but it was like holding the weight of the sky again. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. She croaked, "Family, Luke, you promised." This pulls Luke's consciousness to the forefront. Then he gasped like he couldn't get air. "Annabeth!" But it wasn't the Titan's voice. It was Luke's. He stumbled forward like he couldn't control his own body. "You're bleeding." And Percy realizes what he has to do. If Kronos evolved into his true form, there would be no stopping him. He would make Typhon look like a playground bully. The line from the great prophecy echoed in my head. "A hero's soul, cursed blade shall reap." My whole world tipped upside down, and I gave the knife to Luke. Grover yelped, "Percy? Are you, crazy, insane, off my rocker?" Probably. But I watched as Luke grasped the hilt. I stood before him, defenseless. He unlatched the side straps of his armor, exposing a small bit of his skin just under his left arm, a place that would be very hard to hit. With difficulty, he stabbed himself. It wasn't a deep cut, but Luke howled. His eyes glowed like lava. The throne room shook, throwing me off my feet. An aura of energy surrounded Luke, growing brighter and brighter. I shut my eyes and felt a force like a nuclear explosion blister my skin and crack my lips. It went silent for a long time. When I opened my eyes, I saw Luke sprawled at the hearth. On the floor around him was a blackened circle of ash. Kronos' scythe had liquefied into molten metal and was trickling into the coals of the hearth, which now glowed like a blacksmith's furnace. Luke's left side was bloody. His eyes were open. Blue eyes, the way they used to be. Percy has realized the meaning of the great prophecy. The half-blood of the eldest gods is not the same person as the hero whose soul is reaped. I thought about the great prophecy. The lines now made sense to me. The hero's soul, cursed blade shall reap. The hero was Luke. The cursed blade was the knife he'd given to Annabeth long ago. Cursed because Luke had broken his promise and betrayed his friends. A single choice shall end his days. My choice, to give him the knife, and to believe, as Annabeth had, that he was still capable of setting things right. Olympus, to preserve or raise. By sacrificing himself, he had saved Olympus. In the end, I wasn't really the hero. Luke was. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover say goodbye to Luke. Then the gods finally show up. The gods arrived a few minutes later in their full war regalia, thundering into the throne room and expecting a battle. What they found were Annabeth, Grover, and me, standing over the body of a broken half-blood in the dim, warm light of the hearth. "Percy," my father called, all in his voice. What is this?" I turned and faced the Olympians. "We need a shroud," I announced, my voice cracking. "A shroud for the son of Hermes." So, like any action-adventure story worth its salt, the ending all comes down to family. The fundamental difference between these two equally powerful, equally charismatic demigods, Luke Castellan and Perseus Jackson, is that Luke forgoes the bonds of family in service of what he believes to be the greater good, whereas for Percy, Those bonds define who he is. This through line of Percy's character as someone who understands himself primarily in relation to the people he cares about is established from the very beginning of the series in that battle with the Minotaur from Book 1. In many ways, Percy doesn't change all that much over the course of these 5 books. At the beginning of the series, he's just a kid who wants to save his mom. And at the end of the series, he's fighting just as much for the continued existence of Camp Half-Blood as he is for the gods. This isn't to say that Percy's worldview remains unchanged, because that isn't true. Percy's views are often challenged throughout the series. His quickness to assign moral judgment to physical unattractiveness, his understanding of the Titans as purely evil, his relationships with the campers from the Ares and Aphrodite cabins. But as a person, as a character, Percy remains the son of Poseidon with the magic sword and the cool ocean powers, the cynical New Yorker with the snarky voice. And because he's such a static character, he is able to be the stabilizing force, the grounded center of this deeply dynamic, ever-changing, ever-evolving series. But if we're talking about Percy Jackson characters, we also need to talk about Percy's constant companion, good friend, and eventual girlfriend, Annabeth, daughter of Athena. It's often a pitfall of middle grade and YA book series that the protagonist ends up being a less interesting person than the supporting characters. And in many ways, Annabeth Chase is a more interesting and well-developed character than Percy Jackson. At the very least, it's pretty hard to dispute that out of the core trio of Percy, Grover, and Annabeth is the character who undergoes the most development over the course of the series. Looking back, Percy and Annabeth might seem like obvious endgame, but on a reread, it's almost surprising how rocky the road is to Percy and Annabeth's eventual relationship. When they first meet in Book 1, Annabeth isn't exactly nice to Percy, especially after discovering that Percy's father is Poseidon. But then they set off on a quest where, by necessity, they're going to be spending a lot of time together, and Percy confronts her about her attitude. Remind me again, why do you hate me so much? I don't hate you. Could have fooled me. She folded her cap of invisibility. Look, we're just not supposed to get along, okay? Our parents are rivals. Why? She sighed. How many reasons do you want? One time, my mom caught Poseidon with his girlfriend in Athena's temple, which is hugely disrespectful. Another time, Athena and Poseidon competed to be the patron god for the city of Athens. Your dad created some stupid saltwater spring for his gift. My mom created the olive tree. The people saw that her gift was better, so they named the city after her. They must really like olives. Oh, forget it. Now, if she'd invented pizza, that I could understand. I said forget it. But over the course of that first quest, Annabeth and Percy bond over their troubled childhoods. Annabeth's gray eyes fixed on me. She wore the same expression she'd worn in the woods at camp, the moment she drew her sword against the hellhound. My dad's resented me since the day I was born, Percy, she said. He never wanted a baby. When he got me, he asked Athena to take me back and raise me on Olympus because he was too busy with his work. She wasn't happy about that. She told him heroes had to be raised by their mortal parent. But how? I guess you weren't born in a hospital? I appeared on my father's doorstep, in a golden cradle, carried down from Olympus by Zephyr, the west wind. You'd think my dad would remember that as a miracle, right? Like maybe he'd take some digital photos or something. But he always talked about my arrival as if it were the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to him. When I was 5, he got married and totally forgot about Athena. He got a regular mortal wife and had 2 regular mortal kids and tried to pretend I didn't exist. I stared out the train window. The lights of a sleeping town were drifting by. I wanted to make Annabeth feel better, but I didn't know how. My mom married a really awful guy, I told her. Grover said she did it to protect me, to hide me in the scent of a human family. Maybe that's what your dad was thinking. Annabeth kept worrying at her necklace. She was pinching the gold college ring that hung with the beads. It occurred to me that the ring must be her father's. I wondered why she wore it if she hated him so much. As they work together to survive the various crazy things that are thrown their way, waterbeds of death, and battling the mother of monsters, Annabeth and Percy develop a real emotional connection. So if the gods fight, I said, will things line up the way they did with the Trojan War? Will it be Athena versus Poseidon? She put her head against the backpack Ares had given us and closed her eyes. I don't know what my mom will do. I just know I'll fight next to you. Why? Because you're my friend, seaweed brain. Any more stupid questions? But in book 2, Percy acquires a half-brother, a Cyclops named Tyson. Percy becomes friends with Tyson even if he isn't too sure how to feel about the familial relationship, but Annabeth is deeply uncomfortable with Tyson's presence. For context, in this scene, Percy has just been mocked by some of his fellow campers for having Tyson as a half-brother. Just ignore them, Percy. It isn't your fault you have a monster for a brother. He's not my brother, I snapped. And he's not a monster either. Annabeth raised her eyebrows. Hey, don't get mad at me. And technically, he is a monster. Well, you gave him permission to enter the camp because it was the only way to save your life. I'm sorry, Percy. I didn't expect Poseidon to claim him. Cyclopes are the most deceitful, treacherous. He is not. What have you got against Cyclopes anyway? Annabeth's ears turned pink. I got the feeling there was something she wasn't telling me. Something bad. Just forget it, she said. Now the axle for this chariot. You're treating him like he's this horrible thing, I said. He saved my life. Annabeth threw her pencil down and stood. Then maybe you should design a chariot with him. Maybe I should. Fine. She stormed off and left me feeling even worse than before. Shortly after this fight, Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson set out on a quest to rescue Grover. As they battle monsters and outwit Luke, Annabeth comes to realize that while Tyson may technically be a monster, he's not going to hurt them. He just wants to help. This realization, however, comes a little too late as halfway through the book, Tyson goes down with the explosion of a ghost Confederate ship. Long story that we unfortunately don't have time to get into right now. Yeah, I said bitterly, you can never trust a Cyclops. Annabeth stared across the water. I'm sorry, Percy. I was wrong about Tyson, okay? I wish I could tell him that. After it turns out that Tyson did manage to survive, Annabeth does eventually come to accept him as a core member of their friend group. But she also has a legitimate reason for distrusting him. In book 1, she explains to Percy that she's been at Camp Half-Blood since she ran away as a young child. He, her father, doesn't care about me, she said. His wife, my stepmom, treated me like a freak. She wouldn't let me play with her children. My dad went along with her. Whenever something dangerous happened, something with monsters, they would both look at me resentfully like, how dare you put our family at risk? Finally, I took the hint. I wasn't wanted. I ran away. How old were you? Same age as I was when I started camp, 7. But you couldn't have got all the way to Camp Half-Blood Hill by yourself. Not alone, no. Athena watched over me, guided me toward help. I made a couple of unexpected friends who took care of me. For a short time, anyway. The unexpected friends she's talking about here are Thalia and Luke. They protected her, they became her family, and together they finally reached Camp Half-Blood. And that's where a Cyclops attacked them, resulting in Thalia's metamorphosis into a pine tree, and ultimately setting Luke on the course to becoming Kronos' most powerful weapon. But even after Luke's choice to go over to the side of the Titans, Annabeth still thinks of Luke as the boy who offered her help when she most needed it as a lost 7-year-old, who promised that he would never let her come to harm. To Annabeth, Luke will always be the boy who helped a very scared little girl. She studied Luke and Thalia with large, intelligent gray eyes. "You're like me?" she said suspiciously. "Yeah," Luke said. Well, it's hard to explain, but we're monster fighters." "Where's your family?" "My family hates me," the girl said. "They don't want me. I ran away." Thalia and Luke locked eyes. I knew they both related to what she was saying. "What's your name, kiddo?" Thalia asked. "Annabeth." Luke smiled. "Nice name. I tell you what, Annabeth, you're pretty fierce. We could use a fighter like you." Annabeth's eyes widened. "You could?" "Oh yeah." Luke turned his knife and offered her the handle. "How'd you like a real monster-slaying weapon? This is celestial bronze. Works a lot better than a hammer. Maybe under most circumstances, offering a 7-year-old a knife would not be a good idea, but when you're a half-blood, regular rules kind of go out the window." Annabeth gripped the hilt. "Knives are only for the bravest and quickest fighters," Luke explained. "They don't have the reach or power of a sword, but they're easy to conceal, and they can find the weak spots in your enemy's armor. It takes a clever warrior to use a knife." "I have a feeling you're pretty clever." Annabeth stared at him with adoration. "I am!" Thalia grinned. "We'd better get going, Annabeth. We have a safe house on the James River. We'll get you some clothes and food." You're not going to take me back to my family?" she said. "Promise?" Luke put his hand on her shoulder. "You're part of our family now, and I promise I won't let anything hurt you. I'm not going to fail our family like our families did us. Deal?" "Deal," Annabeth said happily. Even as Luke goes from betrayal to betrayal over the course of the series, Annabeth will always believe that he can be better, that he can be saved from his own destructive desires. Luke hurts her time and again and threatens to destroy everything she cares about, but she still can't let go of the belief that somewhere under the monster he's become, he's still the boy who promised that he would be her family. It's not that she's blind to who he's become, but rather that she can't believe he could truly lose himself, that he could allow himself to, literally, become Kronos. Her belief is ultimately what saves the world, but by the time Luke redeems himself, her understanding of him as a person has evolved from the adoration and reverence of that lost 7-year-old to the more mature understanding of the teenager who knows that Luke has made bad choices, but still has the potential to make better ones. It helps, obviously, that Annabeth has found a new family, someone else she knows she can always rely on, Percy. But as her feelings for him turn from platonic to romantic, new bumps in the road develop. In Book 3, Percy meets Aphrodite, who promises him a rocky love life and doesn't seem to understand that this isn't amusing unless, you're the immortal goddess playing with mortals. "You just concentrate on finding and saving Annabeth." "Do you know where she is?" Aphrodite waved her hand irritably. No, I leave the details to you. But it's been ages since we've had a good, tragic love story." "Whoa, first of all, I never said anything about love. And second, what's up with tragic?" Love conquers all, Aphrodite promised. Look at Helen and Paris. Did they let anything come between them? Didn't they start the Trojan War and get thousands of people killed? Pfft, that's not the point. Follow your heart. But I don't know where it's going. My heart, I mean. She smiled sympathetically. She really was beautiful, and not just because she had a pretty face or anything. She believed in love so much, it was impossible not to feel giddy when she talked about it. Not knowing is half the fun, Aphrodite said. Exquisitely painful, isn't it? Not being sure who you love and who loves you. Oh, you kids, it's so cute, I'm going to cry. No, I said, don't do that. And don't worry, she said, I'm not going to let this be easy and boring for you. No, I have some wonderful surprises in store. Anguish, indecision, oh, you just wait. That's really okay, I told her. Don't go to any trouble. You're so cute. I wish all my daughters could break the heart of a boy as nice as you. Aphrodite keeps her promise in the form of a love square that plays out in the background of books 4 and 5. Annabeth has always had feelings for Luke, but now she also has feelings for Percy. Percy has feelings for Annabeth, but he also develops feelings for Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Rachel is a mortal girl who has an extraordinary ability to see through the fog, the substance that hides monsters and other demigod things from the mortal world. In book 4, it's Rachel who saves Annabeth and Percy from the many dangers of the titular labyrinth, a giant maze of monsters and traps that is almost impossible to navigate. Rachel and Percy develop a relationship in book 5, which Annabeth is not happy about. And yet, when Rachel almost dies in a helicopter crash, it's Annabeth who saves her. As it turns out, Rachel isn't really drawn to Percy so much as she's drawn to the immortal world, where she eventually finds her place. And Annabeth and Percy can finally get together, as we all knew they would. But even though she ultimately gets everything she wanted, Annabeth has still come a long way from the bossy, hero-worshipping, extremely territorial know-it-all that she used to be back in book 1. She's overcome deep-rooted prejudices, developed friendships, worked her way through her complicated feelings towards Luke, and chosen to trust again after the betrayal that almost destroyed not only her world, but also her conception of family and friendship. With every book series, readers are going to vary widely when it comes to which characters they prefer, and I'm sure that for most Percy Jackson fans, their favorite character is going to be Grover or Nico or Percy himself. But for me, my favorite character is Annabeth. She suffers so much and overcomes so much and comes out on the other side as a stronger, wiser person, more truly a daughter of Athena than ever. However, for all of the changes and character development she goes through, I do feel the need to point out that Annabeth does suffer somewhat from not being the protagonist. Let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say here. We've already established that Percy cares deeply about his mother, and we not only learn quite a bit about her, but we're also able to witness the touching character arc she follows over the course of the series. Here's how Percy's mother is introduced in book 1. A word about my mother before you meet her. Her name is Sally Jackson, and she's the best person in the world, which just proves my theory that the best people have the rottenest luck. Her own parents died in a plane crash when she was 5, and she was raised by an uncle who didn't care much about her. She wanted to be a novelist, so she spent high school working to save enough money for a college with a good creative writing program. Then her uncle got cancer, and she had to quit school her senior year to take care of him. After he died, she was left with no money, no family, and no diploma. The only good break she ever got was meeting my dad. I don't have any memories of him, just this sort of warm glow. maybe the barest trace of his smile. My mom doesn't like to talk about him because it makes her sad. She has no pictures. See, they weren't married. She told me he was rich and important, and their relationship was a secret. Then one day, he set sail across the Atlantic on some important journey, and he never came back. Lost at sea, my mom told me. Not dead. Lost at sea. She worked odd jobs, took night classes to get her high school diploma, and raised me on her own. She never complained or got mad, not even once. But I knew I wasn't an easy kid. Finally, she married Gabe Ugliano, who was nice the first 30 seconds we knew him, then showed his true colors as a world-class jerk. When I was young, I nicknamed him Smelly Gabe. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. This guy reeked like moldy garlic pizza wrapped in gym shorts. Between the two of us, we made my mom's life pretty hard. We later learned that Gabe isn't just a nasty person, he's also physically abusive. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill abusive relationship where Percy's mother stays because she's afraid or thinks that Gabe isn't that bad. People just don't understand. Instead, she stays because of Percy. Your mom married Gabe for you, Grover told me. You call him smelly, but you've got no idea. The guy has this aura. Yuck. I can smell him from here. I can smell traces of him on you, and you haven't been near him for a week. Thanks, I said. Where's the nearest shower? You should be grateful, Percy. Your stepfather smells so repulsively human, he could mask the presence of any demigod. As soon as I took a whiff inside his camera, I knew. Gabe has been covering your scent for years. If you hadn't lived with him every summer, you probably would have been found by monsters a long time ago. Your mom stayed with him to protect you. She was a smart lady. She must have loved you a lot to put up with that guy. At the end of book 1, Percy's mother comes back to life, and Percy wants to save her from Gabe. You deserve better than this, Mom. You should go to college. Get your degree. You can write your novel, meet a nice guy maybe, live in a nice house. You don't need to protect me anymore by staying with Gabe. Let me get rid of him. She wiped a tear off her cheek. You sound so much like your father, she said. He offered to stop the tide for me once. He offered to build me a palace at the bottom of the sea. He thought he could solve all my problems with a wave of his hand. What's wrong with that? Her multicolored eyes seemed to search inside me. I think you know, Percy. I think you're enough like me to understand. If my life is going to mean anything, I have to live it myself. I can't let a god take care of me or my son. I have to find the courage on my own. Your quest has reminded me of that. Percy's mother does save herself from Gabe, and not only does she gain independence, a life of her own, but she does also eventually meet a really nice guy named Paul, with whom she finds love again after having her heart broken by Poseidon. Percy even comes to accept Paul as his stepdad, as a parent, and it's really sweet to see Percy's mom get the happy ending that she deserves. In contrast, Annabeth's family exists somewhere in the background of the story, first as the unimaginably cruel father and stepmother who caused a 7-year-old to run away from home, then as the repentant parents who want to try again, and finally as the loving parents Percy can't reconcile as the abusive family Annabeth told him about. And honestly, neither can the reader. Instead of feeling organic, the development of Annabeth's relationship with her family feels forced and frankly nonsensical. What caused her parents to suddenly develop a conscience? Why, after so many years, do they finally want to treat her as, their child? Who knows? Certainly not the reader, because it just kind of happens somewhere in the background. Obviously, it's a side effect of not the main character syndrome, but for a character who's otherwise so well developed, certain aspects of Annabeth's story could and should really have been developed more fully. So now that we've talked about the characters in this series, or at least two of my favorite characters, let's turn to themes, starting with gods versus titans. In my box set of Percy Jackson books, each book's back cover features praise from the usual suspects: Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, the School Library Journal, etc. Most of these quotes are more or less what you would expect: an adventure quest with a hip edge. That's the School Library Journal talking about the first book. This third in the Olympian series makes the Greek myths come alive. The contests between the gods will have readers wondering how literature can be this fun. That's Kirkus Reviews, and I don't think I need to tell you which book that review was for. But to me, the most interesting quote is on the back cover for Book 5. A powerful tale, at once exciting, philosophical, and tear-jerking. A compelling conclusion to the saga. That review is, again, from Kirkus Reviews, and I want to highlight one word in particular: philosophical. We don't generally think of the Percy Jackson series as particularly philosophical, but at the core of the series is a dilemma that can certainly be considered philosophical or even ethical. Which side do you support, the gods or the titans, and why? At first glance, this doesn't seem to be much of a dilemma. Why would you support Kronos, who is power-hungry, egomaniacal, equally cruel to enemies and followers alike? His allies are equally unlikable, and all in all, it's hard to generate much sympathy for the Titans. But now, let's reframe the question the way Luke and the other Titan-supporting half-bloods would. Instead of explaining why they support Kronos, Luke and those like him instead ask Percy and his allies why they support the gods. In Book 4, Percy visits the island of Calypso, a beautiful, immortal being who nurses him back to health. Once he's begun to heal, Percy is shocked to learn that Calypso is a Titan and was exiled to this island forever as punishment for fighting on the Titan side in the first war between Zeus and his father. Percy can't fathom someone who seems so kind supporting Kronos. But Calypso says, "Tell me, Percy, I have no wish to argue with you, but do you support the gods because they are good or because they are your family?" And I mean, it's not an unfair question. The gods are temperamental rulers, governed primarily by their own volatile emotions, their irrational impulses. And most crucially, the gods are autocratic, tyrannical rulers. Zeus in particular is all-powerful, unrestrained by even the other gods. The entire power structure of Mount Olympus is incompatible with our modern ideals of what we would consider to be fair and just government. And if we could choose what gods rule us, I would hope we would choose gods who seem wiser and more emotionally stable than Zeus or Ares or Hera. Even when you're Percy Jackson, quite literally risking your life day after day after day to defend the right of the gods to rule, it's still hit or miss whether they'll reward you for your efforts or just kill you on the spot. But when you're not the son of Poseidon, when you're not Perseus freaking Jackson, life as a demigod can feel even more unrewarding, even pointless. Many half-bloods go unacknowledged by their immortal parent, and only the children of major gods get their own cabin at Camp Half-Blood. If that's your life, pushed aside, ignored in favor of the more important demigods, you do have to wonder why exactly you're expected to fight for gods who clearly don't care about you. You do have to wonder why exactly the gods deserve to remain in power. Shouldn't all demigods be treated equally? What benefit does humankind derive from being ruled by capricious gods whose power goes completely unchecked? But since the Titans are supposed to be the bad guys and Percy and his friends are supposed to be the good guys, Luke/Kronos kind of has a point. Can't be the conclusion that your young and impressionable readers draw. So, as a counterpoint to the Titans argument, we're offered a thematic through line that is repeated again and again throughout the series: Western civilization. This theme and its relationship to the gods is introduced in Book 1. In the same conversation Percy has with Chiron about the Greek gods being, real. You mean the Greek gods are here? Like, in America? Well, certainly. The gods move with the heart of the West. The what? Come now, Percy. What you call Western civilization. Do you think it's just an abstract concept? No, it's a living force, a collective consciousness that has burned bright for thousands of years. The gods are part of it. You might even say they are the source of it, or at least they are tied so tightly to it that they couldn't possibly fade, not unless all of Western civilization were obliterated. The fire started in Greece. Then, as you well know, or as I hope you well know, since you passed my course, the heart of the fire moved to Rome, and so did the gods. Oh, different names perhaps. Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, and so on. But the same forces, the same gods. And then they died. Died? No. Did the West die? The gods simply moved to Germany, to France, to Spain for a while. Wherever the flame was brightest, the gods were there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the architecture. People do not forget the gods. Every place they've ruled for the last 3,000 years, you can see them in paintings and statues on the most important buildings. And yes, Percy, of course they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center. The Greek facades of your government buildings in Washington. I defy you to find any American city where the Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. Like it or not, and believe me, plenty of people weren't very fond of Rome either. America is now the heart of the flame. It is the great power of the West. And so, Olympus is here, and we are here. If you asked Percy what he's fighting for, the real answer would boil down to family, to friendship, to the intense loyalty Athena condemns as a fatal flaw. But obviously, that's not what Percy would say. He would say that he was fighting for his father, for Mount Olympus. If you pressed him a little harder, he'd likely say that he was fighting to preserve Western civilization. And that's how he often describes Kronos' allies, not as fighting the gods, but as fighting to bring down Western civilization. So the argument is no longer which all-powerful, autocratic, often cruel, immortal beings you choose to support, but rather whether you think Western civilization should be destroyed, yes or no. Mark your answers clearly with a number 2 pencil on the bubble sheet and feed it to the Sphinx's automatic grading machine on your way out. Because that's not really a choice, any more than asking the square root of 16 is a riddle. Throughout the series, we get minor acknowledgments, lip service, that Western civilization isn't all that it's cracked up to be. It hasn't always entailed enlightenment and happiness for all, and it's unquestionable that the West and America have wrought a great deal of death and destruction over the centuries. But within the context of the Percy Jackson series, the preservation or destruction of Western civilization isn't exactly a nuanced debate. Whatever the sins or saving graces of Western civilization, I think it's pretty obvious that the present-day population of the United States doesn't deserve total annihilation. Or maybe I'm just being selfish here because I would rather not be collateral damage in Kronos' destruction. But the point is that in tying together the gods with Western civilization, the debate goes from philosophically interesting to pretty much moot. But even without bringing in Western civilization, the debate can't go very far because Kronos isn't offering an actual platform of changes, an ethos upon which he's going to build his new world. All he's promising is revenge, aka death and destruction. And I think humans can manage that just fine without bringing Kronos into the picture. At the very least, I would have liked some kind of hint as to the world Kronos' side was envisioning. At one point in Book 5, Prometheus, the Titan who gave humans fire and was eternally and brutally punished by Zeus for it, Prometheus promises Percy a radical advancement for the human race once Kronos wins. Assuming that Prometheus isn't lying, I'd like to know exactly what he meant by that. Artificial intelligence? The metaverse? Fortnite? But of course, we'll never find out because Kronos is defeated, and as a reward, Zeus offers Percy anything, showing that Percy hasn't remained entirely unaffected by the arguments of various angry and disaffected demigods. Percy says, "From now on, I want you to properly recognize the children of the gods," I said. "All the children of all the gods." The Olympians shifted uncomfortably. "Percy," my father said, "what exactly do you mean?" "Kronos couldn't have risen if it hadn't been for a lot of demigods who felt abandoned by their parents," I said. "They felt angry, resentful, and unloved. And they had a good reason." Zeus's royal nostrils flared. "You dare accuse!" "No more undetermined children," I said. "I want you to promise to claim your children, all your demigod children, by the time they turn 13. They won't be left out in the world on their own at the mercy of monsters. I want them claimed and brought to camp so they can be trained right and survive." "Now wait just a moment," Apollo said, but I was on a roll. "And the minor gods," I said, "Nemesis, Hecate, Morpheus, Janus, Hebe, they all deserve a general amnesty and a place at Camp Half-Blood. Their children shouldn't be ignored. Calypso and the other peaceful Titan kind should be pardoned too. And Hades." "Are you calling me a minor god?" Hades bellowed. "No, my lord," I said quickly, "but your children should not be left out. They should have a cabin at camp. Nico has proven that. No unclaimed demigods will be crammed into the Hermes cabin anymore, wondering who their parents are. They'll have their own cabins for all the gods. And no more pact of the big three. That didn't work anyway. You've got to stop trying to get rid of powerful demigods. We're going to train them and accept them instead. All children of all the gods will be welcomed and treated with respect. That is my wish." Zeus snorted. "Is that all?" I do feel compelled to point out that while this solution does solve one problem, the unfair treatment of demigods, it doesn't address the more fundamental issue that, aside from treating their children more fairly, the gods can still do pretty much whatever they want. There's a lot of injustice that we know the gods have perpetuated just within the Percy Jackson universe. Hades cursing the last oracle to a fate literally worse than death. Ares physically abusing his children. Zeus punishing peaceful titans, and in particular his punishment for Prometheus, who did nothing wrong. Even after the oath they swear at the end of Book 5, there's been no systemic change that will force them to behave differently in the future. Even Percy Jackson can't force the gods to put checks and balances on their own power. Imagine what that would do to Zeus's ego. And given that Percy has chosen to uphold the gods' authority, he has to be okay with the minor changes he has managed to make. After the gods make their promise, Percy has a conversation with Hermes, and while much of it is about Luke, there's also this moment. Hermes laughed. After 3,000 years, you think the gods can change their nature? Yeah, I said, I do. This faith in the gods may be misplaced, but Percy doesn't really have a choice. He has to believe that the gods can change, that they can be better, that they can improve in the art of self-government, or what was the point of everything that he has endured and sacrificed throughout this series? And maybe someday this faith will result in Zeus listening to someone wiser, say Athena, before blowing up another hotel of innocent mortals in an effort to kill two equally innocent children. But if I'm being honest, it does seem kind of unlikely. But both gods and titans do share at least one similarity, which is their immortality. Obviously, in a story where immortals and mortals exist in such close proximity, immortality is going to become a major through line, so let's talk about immortality, or what is it good for? There are a few core themes that tend to fascinate writers. Some of them are so familiar as to feel trite. Love, family, friendship. But then you get more abstract themes. Things that we can't actually experience. Things that we can only comprehend intellectually. Things like immortality. Writers love to explore immortality, what it would look like, what it would feel like, and what it would mean both for the immortals and those without immortality. That's one reason we never tire of vampire stories. Beyond the morality question of how vampires sustain their existence, we're also fascinated by how they grapple with their immortality, what it does to them, and how it makes them more or less human. In the Percy Jackson series, we meet many immortal beings, gods, titans, monsters, and the series grapples time and again with this idea of immortality, what it means, and how it's understood by Percy and his demigod friends. Percy is first introduced to the idea of immortality at the same time that he's introduced to the idea of the Greek gods being real and, well, immortal. Percy, Chiron said, you may choose to believe or not, but the fact is that immortal means immortal. Can you imagine that for a moment? Never dying, never fading, existing just as you are for all time. I was about to answer off the top of my head that it sounded like a pretty good deal, but the tone of Chiron's voice made me hesitate. You mean whether people believed in you or not? I said. Exactly, Chiron agreed. Percy's understanding of immortality continues to evolve over the series, including the realization that Immortal doesn't actually always mean immortal. Immortal beings can actually choose to fade, and some do when they've become disheartened by the disbelief of humans. In Book 4, Percy even witnesses the death of a god, that of the nature god Pan. Percy's friend Grover has spent the entire series searching for Pan, who was lost thousands of years ago, and he does eventually find Pan, but it's not the reunion he imagined it to be. Pan explains that he's dying, and Grover refuses to accept it at first. "But gods can't die," Grover said. "They can fade," Pan said, "when everything they stood for is gone. When they cease to have power and their sacred places disappear." Grover does release Pan's spirit and accepts his charge to take up the restoration of nature, but Pan's revelation does add a new dimension to this idea of immortality as it exists in the Percy Jackson universe. Becoming immortal isn't about prolonging your own existence as an individual. Immortality among the gods is about becoming the embodiment of an idea, of losing your identity so that you can become a living representation of things that are bigger than any one person can possibly be. Nature or love or war or wisdom. The gift of immortality is also a fundamental transformation of your selfhood until mere existence as an individual being is meaningless. Pan could continue to exist even after the destruction of his sacred places, aka the widespread destruction of nature, but without the forests and waters and woods that it's his job to nurture and protect, Pan doesn't see the point in merely continuing to exist. Percy is offered immortality at the end of Book 5 as a reward for everything he's accomplished. "I thought about the 3 fates and the way I'd seen my life flash by. I could avoid all that. No aging, no death, no body in the grave. I could be a teenager forever in top condition, powerful and immortal, serving my father. I could have power and eternal life. Who could refuse that?" Well, as it turns out, Percy can refuse that. He refuses immortality in favor of forcing the gods to treat his fellow demigods more fairly. And this decision is met with incredulity by the gods. To them, nothing is better than immortality, because immortality isn't just about power and eternal life. It's about transcending mere humanity and becoming a being greater than any individual human, any mortal, can possibly be. The gods are cruel, impulsive, capricious, careless with the feelings and lives of others, in part because in gaining immortality, they have shed so many of the pesky values that make us human. For the gods, love and friendship and family carry little to no meaning. They're transient lovers, absent parents, and treacherous friends. Their only lasting connections are to what they represent, and their only loyalty is to themselves. If we think back on who Percy Jackson is as a person, it's not all that surprising that he refuses immortality. Percy is someone who defines himself and his place in the world by the bonds he forms with his mother, his stepfather, his best friend Grover, his girlfriend Annabeth, his fellow demigods at Camp Half-Blood. At the end of the day, this story of mortals and immortals, demigods and gods, is about those most human things, family and friendship and love. This series is a celebration of not immortality or godhood, but of humanity and all that it has to offer. To Percy, losing the bonds he's built in favor of gaining immortality and all that it entails just isn't worth it. And achieving the self-awareness it takes to realize that as a 16-year-old is honestly Percy's most impressive accomplishment in a series that could also have been called Percy Jackson and the Cool Things He Does. And that's everything I have to say about the original 5 books of the Percy Jackson series. But before I wrap up and you click out of the video, I do have to say, but wait, there's more. The end of Book 5 seems pretty final. The big battle to end all battles has been won. The gods have made a promise that things will be different in the future. Annabeth and Percy have gotten together. Camp Half-Blood has been saved. But just as we're in the home stretch, out of nowhere, we get the next great prophecy. 7 half-bloods shall answer the call. To storm or fire, the world must fall. An oath to keep with a final breath, and foes bear arms to the doors of death. Percy's nervous about how ominous this prophecy sounds, but Apollo says, "Percy," Apollo said, "I wouldn't worry too much. The last great prophecy about you took almost 70 years to complete. This one may not even happen in your lifetime." But come on, given that this prophecy is placed where it is, we all know that Percy is going to be involved somehow. And he is in the sequel series, The Heroes of Olympus, where all of our favorite characters are reunited on a new quest, this time apparently also involving Roman mythology. And I say apparently because I haven't read these books. This series shifts the focus primarily to the new characters. But for fans of the OG Percy Jackson series, 2023 brought a surprise, a brand new book in the Percy Jackson series, Percy Jackson and the Chalice of the Gods, which I have read. This new Percy Jackson book, Percy Jackson number 6, is the first book in a new trilogy where Percy, Annabeth, and Grover are reunited for an adventure that feels a bit different from the original 5 books. In this new book, Percy is a senior in high school who wants to go to college for half-bloods, New Rome University. But in order to do this, he has to get 3 letters of recommendation, each letter from a different god. So he's going to have to complete 3 quests in order to get these 3 letters. His first quest is to find the Chalice of the Gods, the chalice that gives mortals immortality. Right away, you might notice the return of the debate between mortality versus immortality, which is the primary theme explored in this book. While this might feel like rehashing of familiar territory, Percy is older in this book, and his perspective on life and aging has changed since he was the kid refusing immortality so he could stay with his friends. And that newfound maturity does give this book a bit of a different feel from the original 5 books. Percy is still sarcastic and snarky, but he's also grown up a bit. While the quest itself is far more low stakes, almost slice of life, Percy himself has a slightly different perspective and slightly different values. Similarly, Annabeth has also noticeably matured, although Grover really hasn't, which actually makes sense in the Percy Jackson universe since satyrs canonically mature more slowly. As Percy and his friends search for the chalice, they make new discoveries in both the mortal and immortal worlds, including some truly hilarious revelations about Zeus's palace on Mount Olympus. I really enjoyed this new book. I like that Percy Jackson has grown up a bit while still recognizably being the same person that he was in the original series. And while I don't think that he is going to be saving the world or Mount Olympus or Western civilization in this new trilogy, I'm personally fine with that. I think that this feels like an organic continuation of this iconic series, and I'm looking forward to the next Percy Jackson book. And And that's the story of the Percy Jackson books, where they came from, what they're about, and where they're going. I'm excited to hear everyone's opinions on the new TV series, and I hope you all enjoy it more than the movies, though hopefully that's an easy bar to clear. This has been the 2 a.m. Book Review Club. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will be back soon with another video. Until then, have a great day and happy book travels!